Hello, good evening. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction, the only literary nonprofit that supports the creation and celebrate and enjoyment of fiction. And we love to say that we celebrate storytelling in all forms. How many of you are visiting us for the first time this evening? Well, you are very welcome, and I hope that you sign up for our mailing list so that you don't miss anything fun, because we do a lot here. Um, a few housekeeping announcements. We will have an audience Q&A tonight, and if you're here, please raise your hand, and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you, and that's so that the people who are watching on the live stream can hear you as well. And if you're on the live stream, you may type your question in the chat at any moment. When the event is over, you may purchase books in the bookstore by going out the back doors there, and then you can come back in here through the center aisle to line up to have your books personalized. Um, the authors were kind enough to pre-sign them, so if that's all you want, then you're good to go after that. All right, let me introduce you to our guest. Deepa Anappara grew up in Kerala, South India, and worked as a journalist in cities including Mumbai and Delhi. Her novel, Gin Patrol on the Purple Line, was named one of the best books of the year by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time, and NPR. It won the Edgar Award for Best Novel, was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and was shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Indian Literature and has been translated into more than 20 languages. Taymour Soomro was born in Lahore, Pakistan. He has worked as a corporate solicitor in London and Milan, an agricultural estate manager in rural Pakistan, and a publicist for a luxury fashion brand in London. His short fiction has been published in The New Yorker, and he is the author of the novel Other Names for Love. And we did an event with him for that, and you can find it on our website if you'd like to see that. Amitava Kumar is a writer and journalist who was born in Ara, India, and now teaches at Vassar College in upstate New York. He's the author of several works of nonfiction and 3 novels. His novel Immigrant Montana was named Best of the Year list at the New Yorker, the New York Times, and President Obama's list of favorite books of 2018. His new novel, A Time Outside This Time, was described by the New Yorker magazine as a shimmering assault on the zeitgeist. He has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship and residencies from Yaddo, MacDowell, and the Lannan Foundation. And Madeline Thien is the author of 4 books of fiction, most recently Do Not Say We Have Nothing and Dogs at the Perimeter. She has received Canada's 2 highest literary honors, the Giller Prize and the Governor-General's Literary Award for Fiction, and her books have been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Folio Prize, longlisted for a Carnegie Medal, and translated into more than 25 languages. She teaches writing and literature at Brooklyn College. Please welcome this esteemed panel to our stage.
Wow, thank you all so much for coming. This is so exciting. First of all, thanks to the Center for Fiction for hosting us, and to our wonderful editor, Caitlin McKenna, who's here, our wonderful publicist, Andrea Puro, who's here as well, to Amitava, to Maddie, and to Deepa. To start with, I thought we could talk a little bit about how this book came to be. Deepa, did you want to begin?
Yeah, I can start. So Taymour and I met as students at a creative writing program in the UK, and our friendship was formed, I think, on the basis of our complaints against the writing program and the faculty, because we found that it had a really Western, very white male aesthetic, and the kind of books that we were asked to read, the writers we were asked to emulate, they were all Western and all white. The faculty was white. And I really struggled with that because I'm from India, I grew up there, and this was my first time studying in a university abroad. And I found that, because so many of the references were, for instance, to Greek mythology, and we were told to read Kafka and Conrad, and none of the books that I had grown up reading books in Indian languages, for instance. And my storytelling traditions are rooted very much in oral storytelling forms, and I didn't see any of that being discussed in the writing program, because a creative writing program is not really about English literature, it's really about storytelling traditions from around the world. And those discussions were not happening in the classroom. We couldn't raise those questions with the faculty, and really we had to ask each other, about how do we, we had to ask each other those questions because we weren't getting those answers, from the people who were supposed to be teaching us. And there were all these questions around translating. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my mic.
It need not be you. It's all good.
You need me.
So there were all these questions around translating the culture, translating the language. Should we be translating a culture for a Western audience? And because we couldn't get those answers, and we were talking to each other about it, and then we thought about approaching, other writers who may have gone, negotiated those challenges and those questions, and which is how the idea for the book was born.
Mm-hmm.
Taymour, can you add something?
Yeah, there were so many questions which felt like the program wasn't really designed for us in many ways. And, I felt like my writing had a foreignness to it, which wasn't just the sort of the foreign words, Eid or paratha or pakora, but also that there was a sort of a foreignness to the characters that made them unrelatable to my peers. That was something that I really kind of struggled with, and it seemed, and because of the curriculum that was so totally different, it seemed to sort of exacerbate that in many ways. And that was a concern that we talked about. And then there was also the sense that our work was being read as though it was, anthropology or, a tourist guide, as though it was representative of the places that we were writing about. And that created a burden too, that, if people are going to read me as though I'm teaching them about Pakistan, then I should really make sure to teach them good things, because there are all of these terrible tropes about Pakistan. I don't want to contribute to them. But that was really constraining, it could sort of constrain the creative process. So these were challenges, and it felt very comforting to be able to discuss them with Deepa. And with the book, we really wanted to kind of reach out to writers like Maddie and Amitava, who have so much wisdom and insight and experience, and to get there to access that. Maddie, when we approached you to contribute, you said that you had already been thinking about a lot of these issues. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. What you'd been thinking about. And
yes. Is it on? Yes. Okay. Great. First, I was so moved to have the invitation to contribute. I think I struggled to find a language for craft. I think I don't trust it, and because I teach in a creative writing program, I'm always trying to figure out, what am I learning that has been inherited? What am I teaching that's inherited? What am I teaching that is from the practice itself? And what am I teaching that I've discovered? And trying to figure out how to navigate between those things and to keep it always alive. I think that was one of the biggest struggles for me, because I did my MFA at UBC in Vancouver in a different time when there were very few MFA programs in Canada. And it was very freewheeling. There was no craft classes. The professors said very little. We kind of taught ourselves. We were like kids let loose in a space. I think it's very, very different. And I, on the one hand, appreciated that so much. And I think it put in motion the desire in me to discover something for myself, and to find the language for it. And I think as I got older and was teaching the programs, I realized I didn't quite fit into the ways of talking about story. Sometimes I didn't trust the ease of it sometimes. but I didn't have an alternative language either. So I think when you emailed, it felt like me an opportunity to try to put some of that on paper.
And Amitava, in contrast, I remember you were very varying when I approached you. You didn't want to contribute to that.
No way, really? I have no memory of that. Because, I was, writers are always filled with bitterness about something or the other. So I was like, oh, yeah. I hate those books that say, and then he ate a samosa, which is a savory blah, 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 or dal gets misspelled all the time, dal, D-H-L. I was like, yo, what's going on? So I would have imagined, I would have said, oh, sure, yeah. Nahin, acha, so I was reluctant.
Wondering if you were worried that we were pigeonholing ourselves by doing a book like this, and was it, did you feel that it was too exclusionary, perhaps?
Oh. Well, I sometimes think that, there's a ghettoization that happens, which is, a meeting of like people, and then we support each other. And sometimes the struggle or the challenge to reach a wider audience or something might not be there, or there might be a comfort sometimes through a certain kind of shared intimacy. And maybe, I must confess, I have no memory of this rebellion or resistance in my part, so what am I doing? I'm improvising right now. It's like, whoa, okay. But I do sometimes feel like, okay, let me give a little story. I remember, I think it's Bushra there, we used to hang out at Asian American Writers Workshop. And one year I saw there was a sign, and it said, it was for samosas, plate of samosas were there. And there was a sign there, fight racism, buy samosas, $1. I thought that was cute, but I also thought it was a little bit too easy, So I sometimes think ethnic lit, or our kind of lit, or the idea of this lit is, let's find racism, let's, let's assert our color identity, or a certain kind of writing. So that was, I might be bristling against the comfort of that, maybe. But I always wanted to, it was a great thing to do.
Yeah. I think we were concerned as well about this, a writer of color. It felt like in some ways like it was a kind of designation that had been imposed upon us, and that it was reductive, that it was flattening us, very, very different people into some kind of homogeneous group, and in a way that it was doing what we were kind of pushing back against, putting us into a box. That was our concern. But like you said, it felt like a useful kind of political tool for organizing, I think, in some way. For organizing writers who have...
Our head wobble is supposed to say yes. yes.
I mean, Madeline, do you, we've called it Letters to a Writer of Color, do you feel that it speaks to other writers too, or not just to writers?
Does it speak to writers like beyond writers,
Right,
or
right,
to
yes,
all writers?
yes.
I totally believe so. Yeah, and when I sat down to write because it's hard, when you're writing the piece, it's like when you think about who I'm addressing, who I'm speaking to, I just wanted to speak to people who are trying to find this language, from whatever experience that might be, and I think what was exciting is you didn't give us strictures. I think to me you said maybe you want to write about structure, and yes. I was like, yes, I do. and then I went somewhere I didn't expect to go, down a very personal path, which it seems a lot of writers did. And to be honest, when I sent you that essay, I thought, I don't think this is what they were looking for, and I'll be totally okay if they say, yeah, that's not really going to fit within what we were imagining, and that wasn't the case at all.
It's a beautiful essay.
It was totally not what we were imagining, in the best possible way.
Yeah, exactly.
Deepa, am I next? I'm so sorry.
Can I just say that?
Yes.
I've said this to you guys before. I think the idea of letters to a writer, young writer, whatever the hell,
yes,
Rilke's title was.
Yeah.
I think people should inscribe their difference, and we always should play on what is canonical and inscribe our difference there. So I kind of like that people would see that you guys have been inventive, and it was an intervention. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yes, I totally, I feel that too. And I think part of what I was thinking about was I wanted to write as a writer of color, but to who would receive it, I didn't have a parameter. But I felt very comfortable, like I'm going to go into some strange, weird Chinese philosophy now. And I feel it's exciting, and I trust that you will too.
Amitava, I wanted to ask you, I wanted to quote a little paragraph from your brilliant essay on authenticity and to ask you a little bit about representation. So I'm just going to read this passage from your piece. You talk about going to Delhi and reading for the first time Ved Mehta. Mehta wrote about his father, a doctor in the public health department in Punjab, and his own schooling in an orphanage-like school for the blind in Bombay. In an English that was plain and unfussy, Mehta made me see that the road outside my house, or my relatives in Motihari, not to mention my Punjabi math teacher in modern school on Barakamba Road, nearby, could all be written about in readable prose and were therefore real. And it's that last bit, that they could be written about and were therefore real. I wondered if you would talk about that.
Let me take a sip of this vodka. I don't know about other people of color, but in our country, English is taught to do your homework, So it's always very stiff, that language. My father would write letters to us. My mother always wrote in Hindi, but my father would write, when he went somewhere, he would write a letter. And since he died recently, I can speak more frankly now. His language would be something like it was only that he wouldn't end it yours faithfully, but it sounded like that. You know what I'm saying? It had that stiffness, and I think we all inherited that because what did Macaulay want? He wanted a nation of clerks, So against that, this idea of these other writers who were using what I call unfussy language, and yet naming things precisely, was fascinating to me. I was maybe 18 or 19 or a little bit older when this happened. And I was like, wow. Because before that, it had been only like I had read Thomas Hardy and was trying to use the word lambent in a sentence or salubrious, And suddenly it was this other language, which was like, naming some things out there. So it was great. And that. The only thing else I would say was that was liberating, or rather instructive. But what has really been liberating is to then do something more. To then encounter other writers who take other kinds of liberty with the language. It's our thing, man. We'll wear it wherever, however we want. It's like the gamcha or the towel. You wear it here, or you wear it around your way, or you dry yourself. You use it as an umbrella. That kind of thing. That liberation has been most.
Was it also liberating to see the people who were written about for you? As in, because I always used to think that, people who live in my village, for instance, don't really appear in stories.
Yeah. Well, there is this passage in that piece where I mentioned this Hindi writer, Uday Prakash, and I then list all these names. Those names you don't find in, I don't know, Jhumpa Lahiri. She's in Italy and doesn't care about English writing anyway, so I can take her name too, it doesn't matter. You don't find those names. These are most pedestrian plebeian names, so it's like,
Sorry. Maddie was wondering if I could ask you about, if you saw that there was a lack of representation in terms of literary technique as well in writing, and because your piece talks about, structure and narrative arcs in Chinese literary traditions. And you write about how, in the Western narratives, there's such a focus on the arc and, the rising action and climax. But you write about Chinese literary traditions where the focus is not on what happens next, but what happens to the side, which I found really moving. And I wonder why that resonated with you, and in your writing, where you're also trying to bring to light these other literary traditions that are there.
That thing when you start off writing, you don't really I had this sense of something that I wanted to open up. But that essay really starts with the mourning of a friend who's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and thinking about the structure of a life, and thinking about how we try to represent or hold or gesture towards it in the structure of something. And then in the process of searching, I went back to a book that I'd read while I was researching something else, and it's this book called The Literary Imagination and the Carving of Dragons by Lucia. And it's a very old book. It talks about many kinds of literary forms, but what I loved most about it is that it talked about structure as movement, as almost like a kind of roaming. And I thought, can I write about this thing that we think of as a fixed Aristotelian poetics kind of structure that has these footholds that we expect and anticipate, and that signal to us that this is literary fiction that is, imbuing the story with some kind of form of transformation or change. Is there some other way to speak to reality differently? And isn't there a long history of this also? And couldn't we be in conversation with that at the same time? So I think it wasn't so exact in my mind that I want to open this literary tradition and show it. It was for me like, I need some other way of thinking. And where am I going to find it? And what is it? You read that thing, it's a piece of theory, or it's someone's work, or it's something, and it just sends a shiver down you, because you're like, that is why I started, that's why I wanted to write. These are the forms that I think are gonna help me live my life. And that was it.
Okay.
That was it. And because it was such about this friend who had been given 1 year, to think about what a year means.
Okay.
Are you saying that the book that one should read in order to know how to live one's life is this one? Because I think so. There are very good pieces here. Acha, and who decided that you guys get to ask us questions, man? You two know this book much better. I haven't even read all the essays. I only read mine and Madeline's.
That's so true. I want to know. I really want to know about how the process of putting out the reaching out to writers, and what happened when the essays came back. Were you like, oh
my goodness! None of this is all off the record, and none of this should be disclosed in this setting. But
yes,
I can't help but gossip.
Yes, we are among.
No, it was a really interesting process. I mean, I think the challenge for us in some ways was that we wanted writers who were writing in a way, it was not so much even about color, but about culture. Writers who were writing from outside a kind of American tradition of writing, and maybe who were drawing, as you'd said, it seemed to us that surely there are more models for writing than Carver or Hemingway or, the three-act structure. Surely there is something else out there. There are other ways of reading. And just to be able to, in a way, it wasn't, it was in some ways about color, but it was also just about enriching our teaching, finding out more. And so, we wanted to reach out to a really broad spectrum, but we thought, okay, if we could design our own MFA, if we could design our own guidebook on creative writing, what would it look like? Whom would we ask, if we could ask anyone? Instead of complaining, one of your students asked us about, don't be self-pitying, I think they said. And in some ways, this was that attempt. Okay, let's not only complain. We can complain a little. We can be bitter a little. We can grumble a little. But let's also actually get the thing that we want. Let's get those voices and those lessons and this.
Did you reject anyone?
That's a good question.
I'm glad you asked Deepa.
Hey, Deepa.
Thank you.
Did you turn down?
I'm not going to say anything.
Okay, that's it. Very good, very good. So it was.
I mean, there were essays that, we wanted discussions of craft. And so there were occasions where essays came back that were not discussions of craft. And we also wanted to be really careful talking about race, because I think it's very easy for us to make these very broad, sweeping statements about race. And I agree with many of those sweeping statements, but that wasn't what we wanted in the book. We wanted writers to look closely at craft and their own personal experience with craft.
Yeah, I think one of the main things was that we didn't want any of the essays to be prescriptive, because I
Right.
find that in creative writing guidebooks, this is how you do it. You have to have an inciting incident on page 1. And instead, we really wanted the essays to be personal about the writers, very specific writing process that's particular to the writer. So that was really the only request that we
Yeah.
made to the writers.
I mean, having said that we didn't want them to be prescriptive, when I saw your essay on structure, before I read it, I really wanted it to be prescriptive. I wanted to know, how should I structure something? And you refused. You didn't tell us how to do that. It's so beautiful. It's so complex, and I feel like I understand it only partially. Each time I read it, maybe in an increment more, but extremely partially.
I have a slightly different reading of Madeline's piece.
Yes.
I think it is not prescriptive, it is instructive in the sense that it shows you, in the way it is structured, how structure should work.
Yes.
It creates a structure for its own essay.
Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful thing you did.
Yes.
That was my aim. Yes. Yes, I wanted it to build another kind of structure for
Yeah,
itself.
great.
I think you have that quote in there that writing must build the. I should ask you to say it because I will butcher it, but
I don't remember.
something like writing must build the room that.
where it,
In
where it
which
can
it should
exist.
exist.
Yes, in
Yeah.
which it exists. Right.
Amitava, can I ask you a question now?
Of course, of course.
So you also write about, something similar to what Madeline does, which is about a suitable narrative, and you talk about how it took you nearly 30 years to shape the narrative of immigrant Montana, to find the voice. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about this idea of the suitable narrative, and what were the experiences that led you to it, and yeah,
Now,
about finding that authentic voice.
Yeah, just because I'm older than you guys, if I forget something, I need to quickly say it so that I don't forget it, which is, one thing I lied when I said that I've only read my essay and Madeline's. I have actually read the book. One thing that I feel should have been there,
Yes.
which really bothers me,
Okay.
Tell us.
is that whenever I'm asked by an editor, are there any magazine editors here by any chance? No, people will be like, no, I will not raise my hand. So, I'm not going to step in here. If Taymour comes out with a book, or Deepa comes out with a book, I'll be given a book to review. Why is no magazine editor interested in knowing what I think about Jennifer Egan or Jonathan Franzen?
Yes.
I mean, I have things to say about them. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And a couple of times when asked, I have nudged in that direction. And one editor, who's the sweetest person, lives in Brooklyn actually, and edits up, wrote and said, I know, last time you had said, why the hell am I not asked to opine on?
Yes.
Even a dead white novelist, that would be good, said, but please tell us what you think of Mohsin Hamid's new book. And I was like, no, not going to do that. So anyway,
Yes.
yeah, what I was trying to say there, that it took me so much time, was really, I mean, even in the early years when I came here, I thought, oh, I'm going back in 2 years, So it was like, I was always like the guy standing on a platform with his suitcase there. You know what I'm saying? That was the kind of existence. And then, when I started doing the PhD and living longer here, I only wanted to write about India. And therefore, I was not giving myself permission to write about something here, because I still saw myself only as living there, But after having been stopped by enough traffic cops, etc., I began to think, oh, I belong here. If I paid so many tickets, fuck, these highways belong to me. My car is, burnt rubber all over. And then I thought, but because that imagery is not wrong, because I always had, as I was driving, I would have this story to tell the person, like, the cop will stop me, and I will say to them, I was rushing to this, or my wife is not well, or whatever, And that became the voice of the immigrant judge to whom my narrator speaks. And so what I'm trying to say is that it just took time to arrive. Time. All these young people there, I want to say, it will take time before you arrive at something else. Or certainly in my case, it took many years to arrive at a voice that I thought wasn't constrained or something. It was a little more exuberant. And I did not feel the anthropological pressure to be true to something.
And it was just time, or was it, because in some ways your essay suggests that it was like a particular moment, that in a way the sort of narrative arose out of that moment that you were at?
Oh.
Or do you think I'm misreading you?
Well, it records different moments, right? I mean, there I was in Delhi. I'd come from Patna, and I saw as a young student, like 11th, 12th standard, these bats flying. And I thought to myself, how will I describe this? Mm-hmm. And then reading it in Kushwant Singh, that's one moment. Mm-hmm. When I'd done my PhD, I went to Trinidad, thinking that I would reverse the story, the journey that Naipaul had taken. And there I saw the name of my own hometown, Patna Street. And I was like, yo. So that was another moment. I had to think how immigrant writing or diasporic writing and a greater attachment to these kinds of writers also continued. Then came another moment, for example, where someone said to me that in Naipaul's book, which Shiolo Go mentions in her essay, in House for Mr. Biswas, she describes the voices, but someone mentioned to me that the illiterate man in Naipaul's book speaks proper English. Yes. And it is only the educated who speak in pidgin. And I was like, wow, that's craft. Yes. A different kind of sophistication and refinement. Something so consciously done that it becomes almost invisible and not noticed. So I think these are stations of maturity or something, not that I'm mature. Stupid that I am. But you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So different moments of change.
Madeline, I wanted to ask you about Do Not Say We Have Nothing and structure. I thought I might read this lovely passage from your essay first. I am in the 6th year of working on a novel which I hope will become my 5th book. I am working with shapes, figures, and patterns, the non-textual expression of a novel, as much as with words. I draw my circle, my sentence, my paragraph, and consider it. I draw another line. Certain chapters float like multiple transparencies over other chapters. My process is frustratingly slow, but uncertainty gives me a sense of freedom. The first few years of writing usually never appear in my novels. And I was...
Can you read all my work to me?
Yes.
I was wondering about that process with Do Not Say We Have Nothing, because that is such an interesting recursive structure. How did it come about, and how long did it take?
I think the whole writing process took 5 or 6 years. It was like each step I made forward, it kind of uncovered some part of the structure. So it was that kind of excavation, or like lifting away the ceiling until I could sort of see my way through. I had written a novel that had been very hard for me called Dogs at the Perimeter. It's a very slender, difficult, fragmented book. And after that, I hated language. I just hated words, hated them. And I spent 6 months drawing, because at that I was minded by that passage. And it just gave me 6 months to just look at things without language. And that contact of like mind, pencil, paper was really, it helped me set something aside, set something down. And then I turned to music, and music gave me the structure for Do Not Say We Have Nothing. Oh, wow. I wanted to play with the idea of the variation and Bach's Goldberg variations, and how something very simple could be unfolded into many kinds of sensation and ways of telling, but all built from the same seed. So that it kind of like opens like an accordion and then folds back in again. So that's how, but it happened stage by stage. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I just kind of followed it instinct.
It sort of emerged as you Right. Wow.
as they kind of took over, because it's a book so much about music and musicians, they had their own form. They had their own way of thinking about things, and I think I just followed them into what the patterning might look like. It was amazing for me. I felt like I was discovering whole other ways of existing.
I think, Madeline, we should ask some question of each of these two people. So you prepare a question for Deepa. I'll start with this guy.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
By the way,
no.
isn't this being live streamed? Yeah. I just want to inform everyone here that if in the next Jhumpa Lahiri novel, a superficial, creepy guy is called Amitava, you will know where it came from. Okay, listen. Taymour has the opening essay in this book. And there is a tantalizing quote of Nabokov's that he starts with. It says, "Literature was born on the day when a boy came crying wolf. Wolf, and there was no wolf behind him. Between the wolf in the tall grass and the wolf in the tall story, there is a shimmering go-between. That go-between, that prism, is the art of literature." And Taymour writes, "For him, fiction is a commitment to untruth rather than truth. It is the ultimate unimpeachable on." So Taymour,
Defend that.
yes.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I suppose this was the thing. It was actually with a group of yours from Vassar that I was talking to a group of them about, I guess it must have been a year or so ago. I can't remember when you were in London. And they were asking me about writing, and I was telling this story about how I tried writing in my 20s, and the novel I wrote was terrible. And I was not out to my parents then, and I was very afraid that my work would out me, and so I was very cautious as I was writing. And then years passed, I came out to them, and then I sat down to write, and I felt much freer. And now that I was sort of my true self, I could write the truth, and my work was better. But as I was telling your students that, it just sounded so false to me. It sounded so simple, simplistic, false, and hollow, just like a very pleasing story. And I was also thinking that about fiction and truth, that that relationship is just so much more complicated, and it isn't truth. There is a kind of feeling of sort of truthiness that I think that I can get from fiction when it does something to me, but it's not truth at all. And that also made me think about the sort of fiction of identity and of my identity, and the story I had told about my identity and how that was a fiction, and that there were other fictions that I had told about myself, and that maybe all of this fiction making was a kind of origin story for me as a writer. And so that maybe the lessons for me in writing fiction were not in the truths I told, but in the lies I told. That actually
Beautiful.
That's my attempt, at least.
Great. Do you have a question for Deepa, Madeline?
Sure do. Actually, Deepa, I just would love to hear you talk about your essay, which is so moving and so powerful, and it anchors the book in the end. And I remember when I read it, it's also an essay about mourning as well, and I was really struck by this thing of writing being both the place that one in which one kind of like finds a kind of stability and anchor, but also it feels sometimes like this complex betrayal of the moment too.
Very good.
I would actually just love to hear anything you wanted to say
You
about
put
the
it so
essay.
much better than I have in the essay. I'm now feeling embarrassed. It is something that I struggle with, and I don't know how much of that struggle is down to gender, down to class. Because I think, if I had been born to privilege, I think I would not have struggled with those questions, because I was taught from a very early age that writing is not something that people from my background do, and we were meant to go out and work and get jobs and make a living. Actually, Catherine Chitkovich, in her essay Envy, which is about being a partner to a very famous writer, she talks about how she would spend her days doing the editing work, which would bring her money every day before instead of her own writing, because that felt to her as something safer. And I think it's something that I've struggled with all my life, the feeling that I don't really have a story to tell, and who am I to tell a story? So those are questions that I kind of negotiated all the time, and these became, they really came to the surface when I was writing my first novel, Gin Patrol on the Purple Line, because I was going through such a tough time personally, and I really needed to be present for my family. And so when you're writing, you feel that you're not doing what you should be doing, which is you should be helping. You should be doing things that actually make a difference to people's lives, and you do wonder, is writing that? But at the same time, writing is what keeps me sane, and it's what keeps me going in those moments. So really, the essay is about negotiating that struggle. I don't know if I have, I don't think it offers a clear-cut answer, except that I don't know any other way to be, I guess.
Can I ask, did both of you write your essays at the same time that we were all writing? So when you sent us away to, or were they there from the start? Like, or did you?
No, they benefited from our essays. They learned about structure, they learned about authenticity, about use of humor, and then they...
It was the other way around, Amitava. We looked at it and we said, what have they not done? We asked Amitava, we asked Madeline,
Oh, shit.
What have they left out?
That's beautiful. That's how it should be.
Would have been hard wherever you decided to, because you were editing and it's such a different kind of relationship with them, and then you have to go away and do the thing that is as if you didn't see the rest of the essays in a way, right? Is that?
I think it also felt in some ways like you had been so generous and allowed us such kind of like an access into like such an intimate space of art making that it really felt like we felt kind of obligated to do the same.
Yeah. I don't know if we would have been as honest
if
we hadn't read the other
Totally.
essays before.
It's a kind of amazing thing that I feel like that is something at the core of the book. It is asking us to be honest about all sorts of difficult questions, and to not fall back on received language. To find some way to say it so that it can be heard in a different way.
Totally. We've completely lost track of our questions.
Yes.
We have 2-3 minutes anyway before questions
I suppose
from the audience.
Maybe a final question from us was, is what do you hope this book could do, or what do you think this book could do?
Madeline, you go first. I will build on your question.
It's a hard question, I think I want it to do what books do, which is exist in the private realm between a reader and it, to have whatever happens in that space be possible. And I think it is one of those books you can dip into, come back to, circle around, set aside, return to. I feel like the way that you've constructed it, I imagine that for a lot of readers, some subjects will just feel more relevant in that moment. And then when they need someone to talk to be in conversation with, they can come back into it again.
Amitava?
Sometimes when I'm writing, I will work through the day, and then at night, I'll read a book on craft, and it always shifts something in my mind. So at a very simple level, I would like writers to read different chapters and find something of use. But the real thing I would like to, the cultural shift that I would like to see is that if editors in particular and reviewers in general read this book, that they would have slightly alternative ideas about, or there would be pause before someone offered a particular kind of judgment. Am I hopeful that will happen? No, fuck no. But that would be a great thing to happen. If people revised their expectations and thought, oh, I was wrong to think that minimalism is the only way to go. Or that digression is actually all right. that people have told such stories where you start with that there is another point in looking for another point, etc., etc., and that it belongs to different traditions and stuff like that.
I really agree. Like, I think if I have any criticism to make of the MFA sort of structure, I think I would love to see a lot more humility. Like, I would just like to see a lot more of this curiosity, a lot of this, like, of the way we teach it, you know? Like, I feel like the curiosity and the hunger is there. And it's just that, in a way, what I've discovered is I have to keep learning in order to keep that curiosity open for others.
Thank you. I think it's question time.
So if you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll come over to you with a microphone. And if you're on the live stream, you can just put your questions into the chat.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum, Taymour. Thank you so much, everyone. This was so wonderful. The reason I'm doing this, I'm gonna, because I was like taking notes when you guys were talking. So I actually have two questions. The first one, Amitava, you talked in the beginning about...
Are you Pakistani?
Of course. So about ghettoization, right? And I think you guys, at the end, you talked about tradition, and where I like keep landing as obviously like a very young, inexperienced writer is that as a writer of color, as an immigrant, you sort of just, and I don't know if this is just like one of those like bootstrap things, but you just have to be better in terms of knowing both traditions. And so if you want to be a writer of both integrity and ambition, you have to just do both. And I wonder what you guys think about that. And the second thing I was going to ask about, it's mostly to you, but maybe to you as well, Deepa, maybe to Taymour. So you talked about like the Hindi writers in your essay, and do you think that the more we sort of embed ourselves in this language, do you think there's like a certain impoverishment that happens hand in hand in other languages? Or maybe it isn't, you know, a zero-sum game. And how do you think about that? Sorry, this was super long.
All good. I am really quite full of admiration for those writers who are able to translate, you know, something that is very particular and yet it is intelligible to everyone. I don't think Chekhov ever thought, will I be intelligible in Peoria, right? And yet, he is read with great pleasure in Peoria. Or if not in Peoria, certainly in Brooklyn, you know, which of course is the ultimate place we want to be read. So, so how to have that sense of particularity and yet that utter felicity which allows what you are saying to be to some extent universal. Is that a false goal to pursue? I'm asking all three of you. Because that's the answer to this young woman's question.
I feel like Madeline has
some insight into that.
Something brilliant, a brilliant insight.
I think, yes, I agree with you entirely. And then I also think there's another thing that is structural, which is that we read Chekhov with peers, with Russian literature, so in a way our ability to keep thinking about Chekhov, keep returning, it's also because Chekhov is great, but it's also because we see the full fabric. Mm-hmm. And I think for some writers in translation or writing, depending on what they're writing, they don't have that fabric. They're sort of like the lone gem. And I feel for that because they feel like they have to do everything, you know, in that one thing that might have the possibility to be universal. But the universal comes from everything that surrounds it too.
Mm-hmm. So have we given a good answer? I mean, have we completely solved the questioner's problem or not? I mean, one way to understand, I think, what Madeline is saying is that if you're writing, you should be conscious, for example, that, oh, Taymour has written a particular kind of book about Pakistan, that Daniel Muinuddin has done something, Kamila Shamsi has done something, etc., etc. This is what Madeline is saying. So that it is not an isolated project, but a project that is in some ways identifiable with, or the writer should try in some ways to map one's own individual creation against a backdrop of some other strivings. And those can be, I need not be parochial and mention only those. It could be, for example, on one hand, James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and Virginia Woolf and blah, बहुत heavy हो गया.
I know, serious.
So, I had a question if you would be able to give an advice or a trick to the youth of them trying to get out of the haze of self-doubt and make their writing exist rather than just pass by in the world.
How to get away from self-doubt? I cannot answer that question. I'm completely not equipped to answer that question. I mean, I feel like the self-doubt ends up being a very familiar friend, and it's always there by my side. But so usefully, I think, actually, in some ways. You were talking about humility too. I feel like that, and you were talking about writing, using words like salubrious and lambent and so on. I think it required, I had to learn, like, to not be terrible. I had to learn a lot of humility. So the self-doubt was very useful for that.
But it's also, to be honest, it's also an obstacle, right? Mm-hmm. Sylvia Plath said that self-doubt is the greatest obstacle to creativity. And unfortunately, what Taymour is saying is, unfortunately, we can't get rid of it, right? Is that what he's saying? And I also like that Lemony Snicket line which he gave to the NPR or something, which I always say to students, that rejection is like water to a fish. That's all there is. The sense of failure. I like, if there's any success, quote unquote success or recognition, it's like a departure from what is real, or it's like, let us celebrate, let's get drunk or something. Because otherwise it's all, the ordinary course is no. So the point I'm saying is persistence, really. Mm-hmm. Persistence, not give up. Mm-hmm.
The doubt is a friend, or can be. It's like, I kind of just got used to its presence. And I feel like it asks me useful questions. Mm. And there's a difference in the doubt, that's the confidence, or the when you're like hard on yourself, like in ways that are not kind to yourself. And then there's the doubt that makes you ask different kinds of questions.
Yeah, it's very good.
I think it's very useful for me.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read your book. I was sort of wondering, are most of the writers people who actually speak another language and are writing in English? And I'm wondering what sort of challenges that presents. Because once again, you're thinking of two different audiences. You're perhaps thinking of an audience that is different from you, and you're also perhaps at the same time writing for people from your own, are part of your own culture. So this whole question of audience and identity, all of this is so complex. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned your true self. What is your true self? And do we have one specific identity? Can we be pigeonholed? Mm-hmm. Is identity something fluid? Lots of questions there. But the Letters to a Writer of Color seems to reduce things to maybe just culture and race, language. So specifically in terms of language, that's probably what interests me most. Why do you choose to write in English? If so, what is your audience? Are you trying to reach a wider audience? What are you writing for? And even this particular book, what is your audience for this book? you really want to reach. Anyway.
Come on, Deepa.
To answer the last part of the question first, we were definitely addressing people like ourselves. So those of us, I didn't find answers to the questions that I had about writing and about translation and culture, as you're saying. And where are those answers, and where can I get some advice on that? So I think this book will help people like me, and it's not just emerging writers or people who are just starting out, but even established writers. I think there's much to learn from just reading about the paths that others have traveled and how they have negotiated the same questions. So I think first and foremost, we are addressing people like ourselves. But I think definitely, as Amitava said, this is a book that we would love editors and people who are the gatekeepers in this industry to read as well, because I think there is much that they can learn from reading this book and just understanding that there are diverse storytelling traditions. So it's a book for both writers and readers, I would say. And there is an essay in the book on translation by Shalugo, she started out by writing in Chinese, and she learned English only when she was 30 years old, and she started writing in English after she moved to the UK around that age. So she speaks about those challenges and the complexities of translation and how it's difficult to translate, from one culture to another. And also the the specificities, the particularities of the language. She talks about how difficult it is to translate, say, Chinese swear words into English and still capture the flavor of what it sounds like in Chinese. So there is an essay addressing that question. Part of the reason she does say that, we are faced that burden of translation because the West hasn't made that effort to understand us. So it is, as of now, the burden is on us to offer that bridge, to create that bridge so that our writing can be understood here. Do you want to add something?
I mean, I also wondered as well whether there was a way to kind of claim, I think you were saying this, Amitava, too, to kind of claim an English that is ours, that is not, that there isn't just a single English, but there is an English that I know or that I speak that comes from my particular history, and not to really, and to kind of maybe to be able to take ownership of that language, and to, in that way, in a way, to speak to myself when I write.
There are at least 15 contributors here by my count who speak another language in the book.
Sorry, most of the contributors speak another language.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But, it's quite fascinating that some of the best writers in English, didn't know English until later in life, like Conrad. Right? It's amazing. And Nabokov, too.
Be quick, guys, otherwise they are going to say last question now.
So I have a question about, the difference between like the kind of self-doubt that you spoke about that gives you like an answer to your writing, like sort of as a conversation with the story. But then sometimes it feels like I also have this sort of doubt when I'm writing that has to do with how it fits into like literary theory. And that is, I think, the struggle for me has often been, how do I separate like ways in which maybe I'm like reading my writing like through the lens of like race and class versus like actually craft. And I wonder if you've had struggles like that and how, you differentiate between those two different kinds of doubt.
We are looking at you, Amitava.
Oh, I was meditating on it. No, I don't know. Yeah.
You do write about pandering in your essay, and how there are these Indian writers who supply explanations, for instance, clearly with an eye on the Western audience, and you call those books for export.
Yeah, for export only. Because, you go to the Indian market, there are some things which will say for export only. And I think some of the books are for export only, But I also quite envy those people,
Yes.
Sometimes you read them and you think, oh, this is such shit. But then they're getting reviewed and getting good money, I'm sure. And I'm like, wow, man. So it's not only doubt, it's envy. Yeah, there's a hand up there, but I just want to quickly say that I don't think we should ever leave out questions of craft. In fact, one should think about craft all the time. And people will tell you about race and class, if you go wrong, or you'll read about it. People will mock you. But if you're good on craft, you're building a nice. I mean, you're developing as an artist. That's important. When it feels like there's heat on the page for you. You read a page and you think, yeah, there on page, line 3, it's getting to something. It's biting. That's good. And that sort of thing. Representation, who cares? It's like people, you'll find your way that way. That's what I want to say. I mean, I teach a journalism course also in my college, and I find my students are first of all like, is it ethical to do this or something like that? And I always want to say to them, boss, go and do the bloody story. Ask these questions later on. Like do the work first. So I always feel like just work on craft, voice, and then other questions like whether we are being true to the Constitution or not will come later. I thought that lady had a hand up at the back.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, very good. See, people run a tight ship at the Center for Fiction.
First of all, just thank you for this book. It feels like, as a young-ish writer of color, it feels like really a gift, and I don't have a copy of it yet, but I'm just so excited for the depth and the variety of the essays that you've put together. My question is maybe a bit particular to my experience, maybe a bit silly, but you've talked about having to navigate a Western audience, right? And how much do you explain, and how do you maybe present the region that you're tied to or connected to? My question is more about the relationship to home or to the other place. I think some of you maybe grew up in the West and some of you not in South Asia. I grew up in India and the US, and I feel very, I worry about people back home saying you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And just, I don't have that assumption when I write that I can speak with any authority about another place either. So, there's that doubt when it comes to not just the Western audience, but the audience back home. And I guess to pose it as more of a wider question, like what is your relationship with the audience in the places that you might be writing about outside the West?
There in the book, there's this conversation between Deepa Muhammad and Layla Abu Layla. And Layla says in that conversation, I'm trying to remember if she says it in that or if she said it to us in an interview, but she was talking about how, when she was asked who her audience was, she said, the people I'm writing about, though that's my audience. And actually when she said that, it really struck me because I felt like, of course it was important to me to sell my book here, but what I was most concerned about was the Pakistani readers. I mean, I guess in the way that you were saying, this question of authenticity, which Amitava writes about, but that it felt really important to me that I should get it right, whatever that meant, get Pakistan, the tiny little corner of it that I'd written about, get that right.
I just want to add that Amitava's essay offers answers to many of those questions. I found it very helpful to read that as a writer writing about India who doesn't live there all the time. You ask and answer many of those questions, and I would say that I'm very aware of the readership in India. Not that we have many readers, which is the truth in literary fiction, but I was very aware of how people would respond to my novel. And as Leila said, my guiding principle was really, if the people in the novel could read it, how would they respond to it? Would they find it offensive? And that was how I wrote the book. And the truth is that those people, because my book is published in English, and the chances of it being translated into, say, Hindi, they're very low. But I still had to assume that they would pick up and read the book. And so having that in your mind, I think, sort of really putting that at the forefront, I think is helpful while writing. So are you writing something that they'll find offensive, or are they going to find it stereotyped or cliched? I think those are good questions to keep in your mind as you're writing. Amitava, anything to add?
One quick thing about, one should not give a damn about these other questions. I really think so. I'll tell you what I mean by that. 25 years ago, at a literary festival that I had been invited to, an editor at a prominent house, I think it was, what is it, Little and Brown or something like that? She said to the audience, that sort of seemed a betrayal of brownness, but she said to the audience, this novel by an Indian was given to me, and I'm like, and she said, but that was hot for some time, but right now it's not. I'm not doing Indian writers, and I'm not doing homeopathy books. Now, just months after that, Akhil Sharma's book came out. And many books have come since. So all these questions that people have, the industries, it doesn't matter at all. Any of these banalities that are uttered, or that we somewhat hear and think how to approach the Western market, doesn't hold water. All that matters is what you do on the page and how it affects people. What was your vision, how you changed it, and what you achieved between those covers. That's all. And that's all you should think about. Am I being true to my idea? Am I doing it right? Am I revising it? Am I putting my head and my shoulders against the wheel every bloody day and shaping something good? That's all. What do you think, Madeline? What do you say? You should have the last word.
No, that was the perfect ending. No, this is a coda. This is the coda. What's so interesting is that we feel bound by what the expectation is, or what the language around what we're doing is. But in what I've discovered over the years is they really don't know. They really don't know what's actually going to strike a chord. And Do Not Say We Have Nothing had rejections from 40 U.S. publishers. It wasn't published until it was nominated for the Booker Prize here, over there, and then published here. So I feel like, and I kind of knew they didn't know. I didn't actually see it as a setback. I sort of felt like when the time is right, the door will open, because I believe in what I'm doing. And I think it's true what you're saying. Like what was important to me was that people whose story this would touch them, this history, I think they should be able to recognize some aspect of their lives in my work. And if that doesn't happen, then I have gone way off to the side somewhere. But some form of recognition, to me, felt really of their of intimate, from the person reading who had experienced it to the history that's in that book. Yeah, that's the coda.
And who cares? We won't start writing in Italian. Achal, thank you. You've been a great audience.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all for coming. Go get your books, and through the back doors, come back through to get them personalized.